God doesn't speak much in the Bible. Today's reading is one of the rare times in which God speaks, and I'm always struck incredibly positive. It's from the very beginning. Jesus was about 30, the very beginning of his ministry, so to speak. Jesus came up from Nazareth of Galilee to be baptized by John the Baptist in the river Jordan. And as he came out of the water, the heavens opened and a spirit descended like a dove upon him. And a voice from heaven said, "You are my child, my beloved. In you I am well pleased." I've always thought this is not just for Jesus, but all of us. You are my beloved child. You know, my youngest daughter, Annie, got married last fall at her uncle's camp up in the mountains of North Carolina. And in the middle of the wedding ceremony, we did something unusual. We had the couple turn and look at the congregation just to remind them that all these people not only loved them, but raised them pretty much their entire life. This was a big family wedding. It's really too much when you have a moment like that because you become overwhelmed with emotion. But spiritually, I think, this is really important occasionally to do. To reflect on what actually girds you up and supports you. 2 days later, I was standing at the camp alone. I was packing away the last of the votive candles, boxing up the last of the tablecloths and the twinkle lights. It was fall. The camp staff was all gone. The camp closed up. The wedding was over. Every guest was gone. I was all alone. There's something very sad about the end of camp, about the end of the summer, about the party being over. And the baby got married, and that generation is now launched. And a whole chapter of my life was coming to something of a spiritual close. And I stood there in the peace of the afternoon, just awash in tears at the sadness of it all. This happens to me every so often now because of my age. Albert Camus used to call these petites morts, little deaths. Once you get to a certain age, you have these moments of goodbye that can open up the existential door to the great goodbye of death that we must all face eventually. Unconsciously, we have to ready ourselves for that, to imagine a moment of what it would be like to pack up for the last time and to say goodbye to all our family and friends. I found myself almost saying out loud, I don't want to go. Yeah. Later that day, I was riding my bike up in the mountains. I kept seeing flashes of different people that I had known all throughout my life that were meaningful, interesting, all members of my spiritual family. They just kept appearing. It was like my soul wanted me to check in with them because they'd been a blessing to me, and they would certainly be on the list of people that I wanted to say goodbye to if I had to say goodbye for good. A number of you came to mind, not surprisingly. We are surrounded by a web of interrelated love. And it's important to keep us aware of this and keep it before us and to bless those people as a tangible expression of our gratitude. It helps us to remember the direction that we ought to be pointed. There's a spiritual gravitas to this that we need to draw upon collectively. The author Elizabeth Gilbert was going through a really bad divorce that seemed like it just would not end. Her husband had the final papers, but he wouldn't sign them. And after rounds of vengeance and lots of reflection and sadness, she just wanted it over. It was one of those unreasonable divorces that finally had a settlement. And then her husband just let the paper sit week after week, month after month. And she'd call her lawyer from time to time, no movement. Call again, nothing. She was like a lot of us. She didn't really think this particular problem was important enough to bother the Almighty with because there's so much serious suffering in the world. This just seems picayune compared to murders in mosques in New Zealand, for example. She was sharing this with a friend of hers, and the friend of hers had grown up in Beirut, Lebanon. They happened to be driving across the country together, and she thought she'd ask her about this particular question because her friend living in Beirut had lived through civil war. She'd seen rapes. She'd lived through the occupation. Her friend thought about her request for a moment, that maybe God was too busy with the big concerns of the world, and she looked back at her quizzically and said, "Where'd you get that stupid idea that you're not important enough? Where did you get the idea that you're not allowed to petition the universe with prayer? You're part of the universe, Liz. You're a constituent. You have every entitlement to participate in actions of the universe and let your feelings be known. So put your opinion out there. Make your case. Believe me, at least it will be taken into consideration." So together they decided they would write a letter to God, and this is what Elizabeth wrote. "Dear God, please intervene and help end this divorce. My husband and I have failed at our marriage, and now we're failing at divorce. This poisonous process is bringing suffering upon us and everyone who cares about us. I recognize you're busy with wars and tragedies that are much larger conflicts than the ongoing dysfunction of one couple. But my understanding is that the health of the planet is affected by the health of every individual on it. As long as there are two souls locked in conflict, the whole world can be contaminated by this, and they need to be healed. I thank you for your kind consideration. Respectfully, Elizabeth Gilbert." Her friend says to her, "Can you think of two people that might want to sign that letter for you?" She says, "Well, my mother, my sister sure would. And my father would sign that letter too." "Good, have them sign it. And can you think of another person?" "My neighbor in New York would sign that letter." "Good, have her sign it too. Think of another person." This went on and on. She named a large number of people. After a while, she kind of ran out of people that she actually knew directly. And so she asked Oprah Winfrey to sign it, and President Bill Clinton to sign it. St. Francis of Assisi signed it as well, and Gandhi, and Bono, Muhammad Ali, even the Dalai Lama signed it. And she realized she had this great teeming cloud of support around her, and she began to fall asleep thinking about this great balcony of people that were enlisting their power and support behind her. They're driving across Kansas, and she lays her head down on a pillow, and she starts to drift off, and every once in a while, she'd call out another name, and then finally she fell asleep. She's holding her cell phone in her hand as she is sleeping. She feels it vibrate. She answers the phone, kind of groggy. It's her lawyer on the other end. He says, "I just wanted to call because I thought you might like to know that your husband just signed those papers." Now, I don't have to tell you that things don't always wrap them up so neatly. We don't always get a bow on the box. But that's not the point. Because neither should we overlook the obvious power we have, this tremendous spiritual power when we pray together in a direction. And about some things, we're always free to pray for reconciliation, for integrity, for the right thing to be done, for grace, for healing, for an end to violence, for spiritual depth. When we bless those around us, we are open ourselves as spiritual conduits to enlist God's goodness. And this is the point, that we need to draw upon our cloud of witnesses to keep us pointed in the right direction and to encourage each other to do the same, because prayer and blessing are most precisely needed when we don't really know what is going on and our lives are full of ambiguity and we're not sure that it's going to all work out right. I finally watched that movie, Flight 93, after a couple of years. I put it off because I think, like so many of you, I am astonished always at how much anger I still have about the events of September 11th. They can come back instantly. And one of those things that movie reminds us of is the powerful unknowing that took place on that day. We saw what was happening, and there was speculation, but no one really understood what was going on, and none of us were sure what to do. The passengers on that flight were stymied because one of the hijackers was wired with explosives, or at least appeared to be wired with explosives. So their instinctive response was to acquiesce and try to negotiate, following the well-worn script of hijackings over the past 40 years. One by one, they would furtively call their loved ones on their cell phones
And they would get pieces of information that something wider was actually happening around them. They heard about the towers, but of course, the spouses on the other end of the phone were more interested in making a profound emotional connection than they were dispensing information. So several of them had to hang up mid-sentence, often to deal with the hijackers who were at that point killing some of the offenders. One guy calls 911 to report a hijacking in process. Can you imagine being the operator on the other line of that? Frantically flipping through a crisis manual, trying to locate airplane hijacking to figure out what to tell this guy on the phone. And of course, there's no procedure for dealing with a novel situation, and all she could do was give them as much information as she had, and at the moment, that wasn't very much. There came a point when a group of them decided they had to act. But they had no idea if this was a wise thing to do. And collectively, they had a grave sense of responsibility for each other. So the guy on the phone with the operator asked the lady on the other end of the phone, should we rush the cockpit? She can't answer that question for him. And she asked back, is there anything else I can do? He stops for a moment. He says, yeah. Can you pray with me? She's disoriented. Pray. Yeah, he says, can you pray with me? What would you pray in a moment like that? She fumbles for a minute and then she says, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. You know, it came back to her in a moment of crisis. And it fit poignantly in the moment. Prayer is most powerful, of course, precisely when we don't know what to do, but we have to do something. It's most powerful precisely when things are least clear in our lives. I hope you never have to go through anything dramatic like that or conflicted like that. But life being what it is, you know you're going to get to some very tough spots that are full with rife and ambiguity and there's no clear path forward. And I want you to be able to pray in that situation because you're used to praying for other people. You've already lived a life of blessing with those around you and you have something substantive to fall back on. I want to remind you to deploy the obvious, your spiritual power to bless your family, your friends, your community. Let those people around you know that you care for them, and you care for them enough you want them pointed in the right direction. This is a season of the year when Christians have traditionally followed Jesus to the cross at Golgotha, where he had to face the most difficult time of his life. In the Gospel of Luke, he is so concerned at the Gethsemane that he prays like drops of sweat that are like blood, because brownie situations are like that in our lives, aren't they? So draw upon that power. Take your concerns to God. Mediate and intentionally call to mind images of people that you're concerned about, situations you find particularly difficult. See them surrounded by God's effulgent grace, resolving complex contradictions that you cannot resolve. St. Paul says, make your supplications be known to God, and may the peace of God, which passes all understanding, all expectation, cover your heart and your mind. Channel that spirit in the midst of conflict, in the midst of ambiguity. You know, when St. Paul wrote those lines, he was about to be executed. And these were his very last words in life. Whatever is true, things that are morally honorable acts that are filled with grace, moments where you see what is excellent in human nature, things that are worthy of praise. Meditate on these things. Feed your spirit with something nutritious, the stuff that makes you remember why you love being alive, the things that you are wistful for on the night if you'd realize this was the last week of your life. Get in touch with that for God's peace. And may a surprising, transcendent resolution of anxiety pour upon you. Amen.